In this module, we continue to talk about social perception and social psychology. In this presentation, I will be talking about stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, and grouping. The idea of grouping individuals is repeated many times during the chapters of Kazan and Chatty, this module. It is even discussed about how we tend to group ourselves in order to group us away from others, in the us versus them ideas. Grouping can be done by race, gender, beliefs, or even what kind of music we listen to. Groups can also lead to depersonalization and other negative outcomes. And it is said that categorizing people leads us to overestimate the differences between groups and to underestimate the differences within groups. It also makes us form impressions quickly and use experience to guide new interactions. Before we dive into these chapters, I would like to do a small activity just to kind of form an idea of what I'll be talking about. So for this activity, imagine you are the boss of a top-of-the-line restaurant and you just recently had your best server, Josh, leave. You would describe Josh as a 6-foot white male in his late 20s and looked just like every other server at the restaurant. So you must now replace Josh. So who would you hire? So the definition of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination that our book gives us is that stereotype is a belief or association that links a whole group of people with certain traits or characteristics. Prejudice is negative feelings toward persons based on their membership of certain groups. And discrimination is behavior directed against persons because of their membership in a particular group. So going back to the activity, so who would you hire? I found it interesting that when I was reading the book, it said that institutions may unwittingly perpetuate racism by tending to accept or hire individuals similar or connected to the people who already are in the institution, and popular culture may signal what kinds of people are most and least valued. So when you go back to the picture with how I described who used to work there and how he looked like everybody else that worked in the restaurant, the people who are most likely to be hired are the white males who are young. So the man who's acting like he was just hired, based on this finding, would be that since he fits the demographic of the restaurant, he would be the one that you would hire. So based on that activity, you see the race coming into play of a white male, and that leads us into racism. So racism is defined as prejudice and discrimination based on a person's racial background or institutional and cultural practices that promote the domination of one racial group over another. It says the divides between racial and ethnic groups tend to be more vast and may promote stronger feelings of hostility, fear, and distrust than the divides based on other social categories, such as those based on gender, appearance, and age. So what I find is interesting is that racism is also broken into modern racism, which is defined as a subtle form of prejudice that tends to surface when it is safe, socially acceptable, or easy to rationalize. And it's basically that people saying that people want to see themselves as fair and don't want to believe that they are racist, but they tend to still have these negative feelings about other racial groups. And even though they aren't saying them in a outright manner, it can still lead to subtle forms of prejudice and discrimination. Another thing that people seem to do is moral credentials. They tend to tell people that they can't be racist because they have some best friends that are of different races, or they know someone, or someone in their family dated somebody, and it just goes into things like that where people try to reassure themselves and others that they aren't racist. But what is very interesting is by doing this, you are really trying to come across not wanting to be racist, and you regulate your behaviors. But by regulating these behaviors, it can lead to the other party to come to the conclusion that you are racist. This is called meta-stereotypes. It means that thoughts about the outgroup stereotypes see about them, and they worry so much at being, let's say, racist, that they worry so much about it that it actually ends up being as though they come across racist. Another part of the chapter is sexism. It's prejudice and discrimination based on a person's gender or institutional and cultural preferences that promote the domination of one gender over another. There's ambivalence, which is a form of sexism that's characterized by attitudes about women that reflect both negative, resentful beliefs and feelings, and affectionate and chivalrous, but potentially patronizing beliefs and feelings. A good example of this is a woman should be the cook and the man should be the breadwinner, or even that a man should pay at dinner. And while it can be nice, it can also be seen can be seen as a nice gesture, it could also be seen as demonizing women and making them inferior to men. Another part of sexism is that women are objectified, especially in the media. They are seen as just bodies and not as humans, and seen as just sex objects, which can also just put them inferior to men and not really be taken seriously. We'll touch more on that later when I show you a picture of an example of what women in our culture wear. So like discussed before, sometimes trying to steer away from one stereotype, it can lead to the ironic thing happening of being grouped into the stereotype that you were trying to not be grouped into. In the study, The Ironic Impact of Activists, Negative Stereotypes Reduce Social Change Influence, it was found that by aggressively promoting change and advocating unconventional practices, activists became associated with hostile malignancy and unconventionality or eccentricity. They studied feminism and environmental friendly groups. And in this study, it kind of shows that when people were pushing their beliefs and pushing that this is the right way and that they were doing the right thing, people were turned away from the idea and that were seen, and the others were seen as aggressive. I'm tying this into what was discussed before because it's when you're trying to push something so hard, it makes people group you into another way and stereotype you. And that's shown in the study by the grouping of the feminists or the ecological friendly people into the hostile group or malicious group. One of the most repeated parts of this module are the in and out groups. So an in-group is what you consider yourself in. You find similarities, and then the out-groups are anything that differs from these similarities. But what can happen is we exaggerate the differences between our in-group and the other out-groups, and this exaggeration of differences can help form and reinforce stereotypes. Individuals will be members of some of these social categories and not members of others. It just shows what I was saying in the fact that we differentiate ourselves from others, and we put up a wall that shows it's us versus them, and that is the mentality that we become to inform. In the picture shown, it has the two parts to it. The first part I would like to point out is the everything covered but her eyes, and then nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel man-dominated culture, they both say. It's showing one, the sexism that is not only in the Western culture, but also in any culture. But it also shows the us versus them mentality. It shows, oh, well, this is okay, but that she's being oppressed by, in both forms. Once you become a part of a group, it becomes something of the social identities that are defined by group memberships and focuses on how individuals are simultaneously similar to like others. You focus more on the positives of your group. Your group gives you a positive feeling of belonging and acceptance and safety. You see, once you're in an in-group, you can become obsessed and you believe that your group is dominant over others. This is called social dominance orientation. You tend to support cultural values that contribute to the oppression of other groups, but that really highlight your group. One of the best examples of social dominance orientation was seen during World War II when Hitler had Nazi propaganda line the streets denouncing Jewish populations. So how do we reduce the problem? People have pre-existing expectations of the relationship between inputs and outcomes. When the relationship is unequal, this incites feelings of injustice in the exchange. One way to help fight this injustice is having intergroup contact. Another way is by perceiving connections. You can also share identity with people from other groups. Also, multicultural, not colorblind perspectives. This means that you should see from other people's point of views as well as your own, and not just become part of one group. Be intrinsically motivated to reduce prejudice response. So the questions for this module I have for you are in Revelation 7:9. It says, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands." How would you suggest our world to follow God's want for peace and love for one another that is mentioned in this verse? The other question is, in the news there is a lot of talk about profiling for one's safety. Is profiling different than stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination? I hope you enjoyed my PowerPoint and it helped you with this section.